I think this is marvellous. I think it's such a pragmatic tool. It's beautiful, but also can functions anywhere on the planet.
Yeah, this base plate, like you saw, like that's your whole deep time history. There's your geological time scale. This is your species, the shared ancestry. There's Luca in the centre. You're standing on it. You're standing on the whole deep time.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's so beautiful. That is so beautiful.
So there's your totem species, but then you follow them back through the geological time scale, which are changed to a series of concentric circles, back to Luca.
This is all based Mulligan's Flat, is it?
This one's based at Twin Creeks, where it's being installed. Mm-hmm. The traditional owners and the conservationists chose the 15 species. Then we did a ton of research to find out, using the Ancestor's Tale, Richard Dawkins' website, to see where the species shared common ancestry, created that phylogenetic tree, different to the one that you saw before in the round, and then built it out of steel. All of the periods of geological time are cut in there. It's all cut into the steel. So when they stand on it, they're standing on the phylogenetic tree of these totem species, which we print the art on the aluminium and we slide it in.
That's right. Well, conceptually that is such a powerful thing in itself, and mimics a proteaceae plant. I've got one plant, it's so beautiful. But it is such a wonderful framework to erect all sorts of things on, and probably some things that you haven't yet thought about.
I have to do a stained glass window.
Once you've got this bit sorted out, you got people painting their particular song lines and stories and of change, in all the places in Gondwana land. Then you might find that this can be a vehicle to carry other sources of information. And because you're going to, the whole idea of creating a virtual reality website for the equivalent storytelling across the whole Southern Hemisphere. It's a magical thing. And to say this is what art and technology should be about, okay? But I want to say to you, my friend, you cobbled together something of immense magnitude, okay? And absolutely right for the times, okay? I want you to know that in your heart and head, okay?
What I will be putting in is the model that you saw that I created at Mulligan's Flats of the ecosystems with the 2 time to distance ratio and the ability to project into the future. The idea that when a community gets the sculpture, they also get a model like that that's dynamic, so that they're able to build in their vision for how to bring species back into balance, into the future, so there's future space, and they're also able to continue this process of seeing this feedback loop between the field work that they're doing, the conservation work that they're doing, and the impacts that's happening on the species.
Well, that's a big story too. I mean, that's complexity too. See, ecologically sound, because you're basing it on A&U science. That's always a good thing. Okay, and to say we've been in the land and this is what we've found about what they're doing. It's truly heroic. So the bureaucrat in me knows, and the scientist in me knows, and the futurist in me knows, and the agricultural scientist in me knows, and all of these things, all bits about, that's part of me, this has got legs. So when we shape the future, we have more than one future. Do we want to have a dream and make it come true? Or are we just going to project the arbitrariness of nature with the arbitrary human interference into the future? I think we've got to the point where we think that's not so wise anymore. We've interfered so much time now. Human creativity has to rescue the situation. That's what you're about. We now need to rescue it. So we come back to white man knowledge as well as black man knowledge, and the synthesization of the two into a single body of knowledge. So that's what I see. That's what this is about. Back to Methuselah. It's a story by George Bernard Shaw, and it's the serpent telling Adam about this. You see things and you say why. I dream things that never were and I say why not. You're the latter, absolutely, aren't you? You're perfection of it. I took to that and said there's a probable future, I said, what will be, and asked why. Preferred future, I want to go, I have a dream and I want to make it come true. The dreamers are the people who change the world. And futurism until very recently said, no, that's not genuine futurism. It's about trend analysis and alternative futures. We can do this or we can do that. Not having a dream, making it come true. We go to school and we are educated at all to become future successful. We learn skills and knowledge so we can become future successful. And if we're smart, we won't do more of the same, becoming successful in something of yesteryear. We'll do it for tomorrow year. Right? And sometimes we can't predict what that's going to be. And the interesting thing was, the whole of things where we created civilization, and if we can put it all back together again in a 21st century relevant way, we're not going to go back in time. We can have a 21st century civilization in a Holocene landscape. But we use the best science to recarbonise the soils and to decarbonise the atmosphere and to restore biodiversity. Indeed, that's what the 21st century economy will be about. Imagine experts being paid to bring species in Holocene native animals, numbats, back into a forest, whatever it's going to be. That's a big thing. Recreating the Holocene in the Anthropocene. Stuff that you're completely comfortable with.
Genestreams is a very powerful visual literacy toolkit, broadens awareness, and so we hope would provide students, young people, with a visual literacy of the future.
Because you can change nature without harming it. That's the important point. You don't have to harm it, cause collateral harm to the country when you change it. That's the speciality of anthropocentric humanity. They're very good at that. Some Holocene would do it too, but not to the same mega example that carbon in the atmosphere has done, which has changed everything. So the idea that Indigenous people can be our teacher is still not totally settled. It's now started and it will be unstoppable. For example, just the recognition that carbon farming management in land is now becoming, just on the beginning of becoming mainstream. It's been marginal, but right now, I think another 5 years it will be totally mainstream. Because there's now suddenly, we've made a mess of the world. Look at the bushfires we had. Climate change, we need some help. Oh, Mr. Indigenous man, would you please tell us what we need to do? Oh, we've been waiting for 2 centuries to ask that question. I mean, couldn't you write a great, beautiful play about all of that? This all comes back to, you've provided a knowledge base throughout time where we can take a transect at any time to say, at this time it looked like that, at that time it looked like that. Now, that is an extraordinary achievement in itself. What's happened is, that used to be here, but that's now gone, and this has now gone back. So we've killed a native species, we've imported a blackberry or some other thing, which is now part of our whatever it's going to be. So if you want to look at the whole history as a mapping tool
it's the way into creating the Genestreams website. Your homepage, in here you've got Genestream Sculptures that'll link across to everything you've just seen. Genestreams for Schools, which will be a program to introduce young people to the Tree of Life through the sculptures, also learning about the conservation initiatives in the region, traditional owners in relation to conservation, which I think is very important to connect traditional owners with conservation, that awareness in young people. And then we have the virtual reality. We have team and then contact us. I want to use the Genestream Sculptures as a catalyst to provide communities with a new visualization tool for managing their local ecosystems.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it is, because you've embedded in history, first of all, a natural history. And then you've added humans to that, and they've interfered in one way or another. How much the interference is going to vary from 100% to nothing. And so bringing back, it's in our hands to say, what will we restore? Are we going to back? How far back do we want to go? Now, I've been talking about the Holocene, which is within the last 12,000 years, but you might want to go back earlier. I don't have a view about that. But the power of your instrument is that you can choose that. You can say, well, in the Holocene, this is what it looked like. And now, if we interfere there, in the Anthropocene now, it's like this, and that's human interference. So you can actually tell the story of how biodiversity has been changed by human interference, sometimes for good and sometimes for bad, more often for bad. But we've done it usually with being totally ignoramuses to start with. Indigenous people, presumably it happened to them, but they actually learnt fast, and they said, after 50,000 years, we got it pretty right. I mean, I think that's the story of indigeny. You know, the 21st century is not about competition, it's about collaboration. And this whole conversation we had has been collaborating with like-minded people to build a strong organisation. And this is people I can bring into you. Okay? It's all about global cooperation. Cooperation is a good word, not a bad word. The best way to predict the future is to make it. We have too many people waiting around for things to happen. You know that famous phrase by the famous chancellor at Columbia University back in 1890? He said, there are some people who make things happen, there's rather more who watch things happen, and there's the rest of humanity who said, what happened? So, he said that in 1890. My first take on all of this is it's shown future. You've got all the right buzzwords to make something really exciting here. You've done enough of it to be a visual source of inspiration. You're aspirational. People can feel this in their own dreams. Oh, this is about storytelling. It's about reconciliation. And then we put it into virtual reality. So anybody, imagine a virtual reality where ones from Southern Africa, Australia, and Latin America all were there, and we could visit and walk into the centre of these things, and each one is embedded with the history, art history of the whole thing. Big picture. But boy, oh boy, that's a strong vision, okay? You've been working away intuitively, but you actually got to a place which is very frontier based, right on the cutting edge in all these areas which we talked about, okay? We talked about where you can take this. You've got such a fantastic presentation here. I tell you what, people will be beside themselves.
These are the locations that Auntie Carol has nominated, based on what she understands. She says it's not her countries, of course, but she would say these are areas where we have nodes, where we know that we could, potentially roll them out over a number of years.
Is there a West Australian university besides that's interested in this?
UWA.
Yeah. The Albany branch of UWA.
Yeah, Professor Steve Hopper. I went and made a range of films with him.
Well, I've actually given lectures at that very campus.
Yep.
In the past.
Yep.
Okay. Well, these days, as a futurist, I work very hard on synthesis of creative work, on human creativity and all sorts, because that's what innovation is about. And inventing, my whole new book is about the innovation we need to make this a livable planet. Now, livable has five bits: prosperous, harmonious, inclusive, sustainability, healthy and secure. And my whole book is around a livable planet, really.
Yeah.
What's the woman's name we just heard? What's her name?
It's Auntie Carol Peterson.
She is very good. We haven't ever had conciliation which we had to reconcile to. Reconciliation is actually the wrong word. Yeah. People use reconciliation, but there was never conciliation. There was never amicability was lost, and then we have to recover it. But the frontier wars have not actually been resolved. We never had a peace treaty. Okay, so technically, if you don't have a peace treaty, we're still at war. That's how peace works. Okay, we're still at war until we have a peace treaty. Yeah. Now we have an armistice, perhaps. Some people would say no, but other people would say yes. But we don't have a treaty. We don't have peace. And peace requires a peace process. Nelson Mandela showed us that. And that's why he was so fantastic of turning to the people who put him in jail for 29 years or whatever it was, and said, I'm not going to punish you at all. I'm going to let your guilt bring you to the table, and we'll create a reconcile South Africa, a conciliated South Africa. It's worked pretty well, except some of the current more African governments haven't been all that good, so that's another story. Corruption is corruption. But that's the pattern. And we don't get the bureaucrats in Canberra. They think Canberra-centric. This has to be on the land.
With the people.
And every local government leaders. So the federal government gives them money to make it happen. That's all they do. And a whole lot of people, we could have a whole group of people who run the show. And the experts that come and work with the local governments to help put this program together. So, okay. And this thing can be part of the truth telling and story and conciliation. We want to teach you, white fellas, about what we know about the land here.
What other topics it raises when you have the traditional owners working with conservationists to try to stop environmental degradation, environmental destruction, as well as what's happening here. You see what's happening up in the mountains. I only saw it yesterday for the first time. They took me to the amount of forest that had been destroyed here. Humongous. You can see it from Google Earth. It is humongous. So these sculptures, there'll be not the full sculpture, but there'll be a 3D model done and ready for the big tree festival here, in which people will talk about that in relation to the sculpture as well.
Let's talk about that at the moment, because I'm actually more hopeful that this is going to turn around fairly quickly. Why? We have too much carbon in the atmosphere and no carbon in the soil. At the end of the Holocene, which is when indigenous farming ended, and after the Industrial Revolution, fossil fuel farming started, there was 350 parts per million of carbon in the air and 5% carbon in the soil. Today it's 410 in the air and less than 1% in the soil. In other words, one of the things we've done not only is put all that fossil fuel in the air, we mined the soil of carbon and put that in the air too. So in disturbing nature, we have profound. So we have to do two things. We have to decarbonise the atmosphere, but we also have to recarbonise the soil. Right now, the net photosynthetic capacity of the planet is the equivalent of 3 trillion trees. If you add up all the photosynthetic capacity, some of it's shrubs, some of it's trees, some of it's algae in the ocean, okay, is equivalent to 3 trillion trees. We have to double it to 6 trillion trees. Okay, and there's good things happening. I mean, that's why I'm coming back to the land now. In 10 years' time, we'll be making steaks in factories. Okay?
Yeah.
The biology is now done. We have Bolsonaro levelling the Amazon and selling off the terra preta soil, which is priceless thing, into a piece of Holocene agriculture before. What the geologists said, we had a epoch which ended at the birth of the fossil fuel area called the Holocene, which was 12,000 years long. You would know about this, of course. But the important point is, it's when human civilization was basically born. Okay, and now we have the Anthropocene, right? And the Anthropocene is we've fucked up the entire world, and it's mostly about carbon. Now, I'm a biochemist specialising in carbon chemistry. That's what my whole PhD was about. Okay, and I did carbon and chemistry, so it's just something I really know a lot about. Carbon farming is going to become mainstream anyway, in all its form. And the indigenous people know about carbon, so you can add this to your story. That was my long way of telling all of this, okay? Restoring the land means using indigenous knowledge to restore the land. You know that part. But the point about this is, I've given you the argument we have to decarbonise the atmosphere. We use photosynthesis for that. For example, when the cattle goes into factory, all that land we've cleared for cattle can go back to rangeland and start fixing carbon. And the owners of the land, including the indigenous people, will get carbon credits for letting it So letting it be, letting it regenerate. Okay, so income can come to Indigenous people. Okay, they get actually paid to restore the land, not just from government grants, but in a mainstream economy because we put a price on carbon.
See along here, the idea on this page is to give every community their own page. So Twin Creeks, for example.
There's one here. See, conservation stories, putting back what's lost. That's good. But what I'm talking about is making the land climate change resilient, climate change safe. Okay. Climate change safe is good. In other words, when we put it back together, we're going to make that as resilient as we can. That means we have to put the carbon in the soil, because a lot of the species we've actually mined the land and soil of carbon, and said they actually mined it. That's exactly what we've done. Okay, so I would put something on, and this is science too. Now it's the science, not science of species in Gondwana. It's the science of creating a habitable planet, a livable planet. And you have something to say about that too, because Indigenous knowledge, which is now just becoming accepted, we can now offer them the whole kit and caboodle of Indigenous knowledge, not just the little bits they want to hear, to say, we are not only we're going to restore this land, tell the storylines, which includes how we treated the land and how we looked after it. It's all about recarbonising the earth. And so that's a whole big ecological story which you can put in to your narrative. So these people, as they go along the song lines and talk about the species which are there, can also talk about what we did to keep it climate resilient. And okay, so I'm adding to your complexity, but it's all based on science, which is good. The only Indigenous issues, you also got climate science, and particularly recarbonising the land and the soil. That is the bottom line here, because we have to photosynthetically take it out of the sky and put it in the land. Okay. Another part of your story. So it's getting ever richer. The whole story is getting richer.
But it'll be about bringing species back into balance by using the same tooling that you use for your life as an individual or community, but at the same time is looking at bringing ecosystems back into balance. So the whole thing about thinking of deep ecology. Balance
on the land in the thing, but also on the planet.
Do that by initially making visible threatened species, individuals. We did it with the betons at ANU when
that's a good one to start with.
Yeah, we did that, and so you could fly.
You got the numbat, you got pilots things over in Western Australia too. I mentioned.
Yep.
I don't know. Durandra State Forest is a bit far too north. Maybe I don't know how to work.
Did you see the VR seeing individuals?
I did briefly.
Yeah. So that's the direction. That's the next step that I'd like to take the website in. That ability, we will end up with the ability to say fund species by which you can show, particularly critically endangered species, you can show the number of individuals that are within the species that you can access through the sculpture, and then you can engage with conservationists that are looking to increase the numbers in those species.
Actually, what you're trying to do is create the Holocene in the 21st century. In other words, put the place back to where it was with all the intact species in place. Now, that's a soil carbon story, it's a biodiversity restoration story, but you need a big embracing concept. So in my book, I've said that what we actually have to do is mimic the carbon distribution of the Holocene, because the ants have put too much in the air and took it out of the soil. We have to do two things in our agriculture. One is to maintain the high productivity agriculture of the Anthropocene, but have the ecological integrity of the Holocene.
Yeah, wonderful.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay? So that's your story. Now, that's scientifically based too. when you start using words Anthropocene, all the bureaucrats in the Australia can say, well, shit, what's Anthropocene? That's good.
Yeah.
You're blinded with a bit of science, okay? Okay? So, and that's an umbrella now for all the song lines, all the species, following the song lines, because that gives us knowledge about what the Holocene thing was like. I mean, that's a treasure trove of thinking and concepts which tell us how we can recreate the Holocene. So what you're doing is recreating the Holocene in the Anthropocene, just as we are recovering, because the whole climate science journey is to create, mimic, that's the word, mimic the Holocene in the Anthropocene. Got it?
Sure.
Okay, you're strong on geological time, so you know this well. But that's what it's all about. That's a simple message, which is an umbrella message, which for everything you're doing, and you can do all the songlines, all the stuff about species, all these sorts of things.
Yeah, providing visual literacy for the future is part of what this Genestream's vision is about too, in terms of where they want to get to.
Tell me in a couple of minutes how you see that going. About how Genestream can inform school kids.
What I want to do is to leave the schools that we work with and visit, not just with a program, but with something that they are the custodians of. And what they're the custodians of is the model for bringing the species in their area back into balance. It comes back to, so we go to the school, we introduce them. This was the other one that I did in Africa. This was
Whereabouts in Africa?
This is in Uganda.
Oh, it's Uganda.
Yeah. And so I was contacted by the school there, and they said, we saw what you did at Uluru, could you do something like this? So all the schools, all the kids did the drawings and went out and planted the trees and made a bunch of films about that and gave me them, and that's fantastic. It was a great program.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful.
It was really good. So the way I think that I'm seeing it working for the schools is that we leave them with a model that looks like this, not just a sculpture, but this. So this is growing through time. And then the students are told, okay, these are your threatened species in your region. You're the custodians of it.
And you see this is the red bit.
Yeah, that's the red bit.
And we have to make it green.
That's it, have to make it green. So we're talking about how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it by, and what are the fieldwork actions.
That's history too, you see. That's you say, well, we can do that by 2027, or we can do that by 2034, or we can do that by 2050.
But you visualise it, and it's there every day.
Yeah, you visualise it at the destination. Having fixed the problem, created the outcome you want, and then visit the past and say, reimagine how you might get there.
Exactly.
It's a reimagining, strategic reimagining of the journey you will make, and then you put that into a future
there's
plan.
There's plenty of examples around the world of how to do it.
Yeah.
See this in closer detail. You can see that we've got this one as in red. We're going to build into this future, this plan that we've got for field work and community engagement, working with the traditional owners to bring the species back. So you asked me, how do I see the school program working? I think that the school program is partially about leaving each school with a model that they can then access on the Genestream's website, and work with it every day. And then this empowers citizen scientists with the new tool as well, who are out there working with the schools as it is.
We want to make this project one of our big stories. And the whole issue of Gone Wonder, there's all that science we told to them. The kids in the schools who are artistically inclined will love the sculptures and want to do that part. The scientific kids will want to do. You've got providing a whole series of things. So
we're clear, aren't we? That model that I showed you just then and the Genestream sculpture are exactly the same data. Okay. They're exactly the same. All I did was take that 1788 point and tilt it to that deep time point, tilted it so it was horizontal. So the base platform that you're standing on consists of all that deep time story of shared ancestry. Okay. They are the same. So the students get both. They get the sculpture potentially, but they're also getting that model that you're seeing talking about managing the environment, right?
Okay. And if we get a coalition, forming a coalition around your idea, see what I'm trying to do here? and to make it stronger, ever stronger.
It's what we can do in this first stage. The second stage of the sculpture becoming dynamic, whereby people can put data in and stuff. I think that's where it gets really, really interesting to see that part of the development of the project running. So we've got 4 virtual reality experiences now. We think that as a data capturing kind of funnel that visualizes the data that conservationists and scientists put into the system, and then coming out as programs that students can interact with, or people that visit museums can interact with, or anyone really can nominate. It's either going to be VR or it's just going to be a flight using their PC. That's perfectly fine, and people can keep a record of where they've gone.
Okay,
we're getting closer
to
this place. We can do this.
Well, that's why you're getting somewhere to the point where more people should know about you, and more people want to help you. You created a bandwagon that other people will come and say to you, "Can I please join you?" You don't have to get them to join the other way. You've got something which is exciting enough to say, "Can I be part of this story, please?"
It's getting.
You've got to. That's a transformation point. When you cross that threshold, you've got something which is seems to be worthy, and all your pioneering struggles can be done. And you say, well, now let's actually build this and make it, in this case, the whole global connection, the art and technology connection, the school connection, because we're making the story a natural coalescence of different streams. You talk about your dream streams, but this is a social coalition too.
Yes, it is.
People to people who want to be part of a bigger story. Every person who's doing a worthy thing longs not to be so isolated.
Communities. This was the community the other night. It's got a couple of traditional owners that came, and these are all the people interested in seeing a Genestream sculpture in Warburton.
Warburton?
Yeah, this was the dinner the other night that was here.
You've got a fantastically inspiring story here. And see Carbon Arts, for example, I mean, she's in the same space as you are.
Yeah, it is the same space.
Art for climate change. And I mean, you've been around long as I have, you can actually find people who have shared journeys who want to fuse with other like-minded people to create a bigger story.
Yeah.
And your story is now, because we can globalise it around the southern hemisphere, we can connect with indigeneity. We can be into land restoration and carbon farming. We can do all, and around the branding of, the Holocene and the Anthropocene. Holocene nature in an Anthropocene civilization, if you like. Words like that. That's a big story.
That's a big story.
And it's exciting, and to say, and we're using 21st century technology.
Well, it's beautifully capped, and that concept.
10,000-year-old biology.
Yeah, I really like that. So we'll put in along here Project Vision. That's what we're missing here. We're missing Project Vision.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done, Ben.
With SciArt, I was going into schools with scientists, and we were talking to students in relation to Uluru. We were saying, look, what's the age of the rocks here? And what life forms were living when these rocks were formed? And how do we connect that? I went in with an astronomer to the story of the stars, like when the light that we're seeing from these galaxies, distant galaxies, which ones that we see with our eye at night left those stars, those galaxies, when these rocks were formed. So the astronomers bring all that together, and we're applying that to Astro Rocks, the Astro Rocks Festival, which we've been funded to go to. I'm a guest speaker there. Marley and I will be working there. That's in September. But that kind of thing where you're broadening, and then the kids all did drawings about it. Mm-hmm. It's all on the SciArt program. And I'm thinking that the initial starting point might be something like that for Genestreams, but to what it will be I think the incursion word is good. So we have a Genestreams team that visits the school. I don't think it's necessarily Marley and myself. We've got some people in mind who would do that.
Well, that's going to go way back beyond the Anthropocene, and going to go way back into the Carboniferous and whatever,
But the focus being an awareness of the balance of natural systems through deep time. This is the two school. I haven't done many. I've did like the Uluru one, right? There's myself and the astronomer, and so this was the objectives of the project.
Another piece of the narrative, how the stars are telling. We're getting the story of the planet, of the Earth, and we can get the story of the stars, and they come back into. So in other words, just think about a picture. Like this was happening on the land, and this particular thing happened when that star, when a molecule of light from that star, a photon left that star, and we're seeing it as it was X million years ago, and so again, it's about the real time. I mean, it's all good. I mean, and that's a really lovely. I mean, all of that stuff is good.
We've bought some inflatable globes, and what we're going to do with them, with texture, is draw back the lines of the cratons, follow Australia back, so it goes down to Antarctica, around here, Gondwana, moves around, and starts moving up here. Then by the Ordovician, it's if we're going back in time, it's crossing the equator. Then it's up here, and then it starts bouncing across east to west for a time. Eventually, we get back to 4.2 or so billion years, get to the Jack Hills. And with these textures, we've followed the cratons of Australia around the planet. Then we translate that across into a mural that we paint with the indigenous artists, and then we connect that with the story of the stars. So as we move back through the story of the cratons, we're going back through time. So we're telling the story of the night sky. And it's all going to be in this painting.
That's good. That's all good. I can't fault it. It's great stuff. My brother. I have a brother who's David Ellyard, who used to run a big.
I read his book before me and Peter started talking again. I read this book. I said, "The brother, you remember that?"
Yeah, I did.
That's my brother.
He used to run a program on ABC television called Stargaze, where he talked about the stars. He worked with Robin Williams for many years, and then he wrote books about stars. And he's my brother. He's 5 years younger than me, and. That's his whole life has been about that, and the history of science, the history of stars. And so there's a star story too, as well as an Earth story, isn't there? And they come back to what's happening. It's an inspiring story because you're basically revisiting the past, and what I'm trying to add to this is making sure the future, and this is a moment in time. I have a process called future history. Now, future history is the history from a point in the future where we want to be, describing the land we want to be, in the present tense, not in the future tense, but in the present tense. And then that's a future narrative. But then we talk about future history. Futurists call that backcasting, not forecasting. And it is telling the time between the present and that future time from the point of view of the future. In 2022 this happened, in 2064 that happened, in 2082 that happened. So you're actually creating a strategic map of future actions by telling a story from the past. Now that's a whole piece of what futurism is about. I don't know how you can use that, but again, it's a narrative. It's a narrative taking the past into the future. Okay. So in other words, you can actually say, well, the things ought to happen. You know what ought to happen to make all this, put all this back together again, and you say, well, in 2026 we did this, and these people did it.
That's right.
And 2029 this happened, and 2034 something else happened. Now it doesn't matter whether it actually happens that way. It's actually getting people to think about, in this case, restoring the Holocene in the Anthropocene.
Exactly.
How we got there from the point of view of having arrived there. Okay? Okay, so that could be so that then we're taking the Gondwana story, which is you've done so brilliantly well, into future action. So this kid in the school say, well, I can be part of that story. I'm a little kid and I'll be in my middle age then. Wouldn't I like to be part of that story? Mm. So you're fitting the kids who've got most of their life in front of them. Not an old codger like me who's got most of life behind me, but a kid who's got most of life and say, oh, it's not about the past. It's about my role as a human being when I'm grown up. Mm. And so it's an inspirational way to inspire kids' career pathways.
Well, yes, and to be included.
So they choose to include themselves, exactly. Yeah. And the beautiful story is it links what the Indigenous people did thousands of years ago, what the rocks happened to the rocks millions of years ago, and what we have to do in the future, because we have, during the next couple of generations, do certain things to make this a habitable planet again. Yeah. Okay? A livable planet. Why do we have schools? To prepare people to be successful in the future. Okay? When we plan to create any success, we are making decisions every day about that. We've been spending the entire day talking about what the next steps are. We're planning the future. Now, we don't actually have a toolkit for doing that. We actually don't know how to do it. There should be a part of the curriculum in every school in the world. How do I shape the future? What do I have to do to be successful in the future? You've told me all these facts which don't bear any relation. I need a skill set which says, how can I become successful in the future? Whether a big corporate, a startup, a kid, you all want to have a skill set to shape the future. Well, I've just created that. Okay? Now, that's what I've done after 30 years. It's my proudest thing I've ever done in my life. And the book is called The Future Knowledge Compendium, and the subtitle is A Brief for Humanity for 21st Century Success. That's the book. Well, do you know the difference between a skeptic and a cynic? A skeptic is a left-brained person that has to be convinced by logic. Mm. Yeah. A cynic is a disillusioned idealist that has to be re-illusioned. And they're often right-brained people.
Potentially, could you see a way, you have to think about this for a time,
is
there some way in which some part or some elements of it might feed into like a Genestreams project if we have something for schools? Well,
I can think about songlines first of all. Let's talk about that. Think about future songlines, the unwritten ones. Oh. How do we continue in a 21st century? It's not only restoring the Holocene and the Anthropocene, but it's how we're now living in a global village. We're doing a whole lot of other things, and the local and the global are one and the same. I've created a concept called planetism. Mm-hmm. Nationalism is first allegiance to nation, tribalism is first allegiance to tribe, planetism is first allegiance to planet. No brainer, right? Mm-hmm. You're a planetist, I know. I don't have to ask you that, do I? But I've just given you a name, and I just describe the values, 10 values that you have as being a planet in this book. Okay? And it doesn't mean you're not celebrating culture, but it means so John Trump was America first. He actually said that. Joe Biden, if he's pushed it, so he might be grudgingly told that I'm planet first. Mm-hmm. Angela Merkel certainly is Europe first, not Germany first. Mm-hmm. The Brexiters are England first, not even Scotland first, because Scotlanders hate the idea. They call Britain first, but they're not even, the Irish and the Scots voted against Brexit. Mm-hmm. They don't want it, they want to go back to Europe, thank you very much. Mm. So, planetism, that's Greta Thunberg is the exemplar, yes, okay?
She is.
And so my book is great for 19 and 20-year-olds, because they get this.
They get it, that's right.
And all the old fogies around don't. I mean, we have a whole defence establishment that says we have to avoid war with China. Why would China have a war? They're winning anyway. Collective stupidity has no limits. We should have another conversation about Genestream, I think, maybe.
I think it's going to be really
interesting. What intrinsically is, and what it might. If I've got anything at all to add, you have a specific thing. What I try to do is make things more generic. More. What's Genestreams all about, really? It's about evolution. Yes, of course it is. It's about a whole lot of things. It's about understanding where everything is at in both in evolutionary terms, but also human interference in evolutionary. In other words, human interference in nature or not nature, and how that's endangered some things and advantaged others, endangered the numbat and allowed the kangaroo to thrive. Give you an example. We've changed the world, and that's not bad in itself, but if we are making things extinct, it's different. It's different. So we should be only in the rescue of animals and plants business, which is important as that is. We need to create a world where everything can thrive, and that's the Holocene again, coming back there, to create an environment where, and the indigenous people burnt things, not only to manage the land from fires, but also give a chance to all these early species, like the wattles, to have a rich diversity on the land. Otherwise, we have all old growth forests everywhere, and the wattles die out, become extinct, and that's not good. We need to think about what maximising biodiversity is, actually managing land, and the indigenous people know all about that. They don't need to be told. Now, what drove that whole message, I don't really know. I don't know enough about the culture, but I know the net result is we have a much more diverse thing. I know when indigenous people came to Australia, you know what was growing here in the streets? You would know.
Well, they were not eucalypts. They were not.
No, there were no eucalypts, almost no eucalypts.
Yeah. So the fire stick.
Casuarina was the dominant genus on the land.
Right.
They bought, but genus, indigenous bought fire.
Yes.
And casuarina can't deal with fire, and eucalypts can.
Yeah, they changed the landscape.
They need fire to germinate a lot of the species, as we do. Okay. So, indigenous people changed the land. The casuarina now are a minor part, a very important part, but they're a minor part. They were once the dominant part, of the land. So that's a huge thing. The era of the eucalypt is 50 years old, 1,000 years old. It's not forever. It's interesting to think of. So coming back to evolution, I often track that, but you might look where all the casuarinas are in that. They would have flowered for a long time, and then they would have come back. But in your gene streams, you could tell that story. Okay. Now, Europeans came here. They did several things. First of all, they said anything was here is waste. It's worthless, and everything we bought is priceless. So we bought oak trees, we bought sheep. We even banned sheep from being exported because they're so precious. But we actually said we gave away the macadamia nut for nothing, because that was found. The Americans found that after World War II.
Yeah.
They said,
"It's amazing.
I found this nut," and we said, "Well, that's something the blackfellas used to eat." and we imported the industry back from Hawaii. We weren't even smart enough to know, or we're so deluded that we actually said, "This is a worthwhile nut." I mean, that's how stupid we are. We actually we gave away the macadamia nut and all the genus Eucalyptus world forest as nothing, because we want to get rid of it, didn't we? We want to plant spiky trees and evergreens and oak trees and elms. But what was here was rubbish. I mean, the whole native vegetation movement only was born in the 1950s. People, I mean, certainly within my lifetime. I mean, native gardens became a big thing.
The 70s.
In the 70s, 60s and 70s, really.
Yep.
But before that, we wanted English gardens, didn't we?
Yep, roses.
Right. And that's how
roses and
how unaware we are. And of course, at that time, we started for the first time listening to Indigenous people a bit. So we now say, well, they know a lot more than we do. Maybe we should learn from them. Sit at their feet and say, "Wise man, tell me what you know," rather than doing the other way around, telling them what they want to know, which we've done for 200 years. Okay.
Are you familiar with this painting? It would be a Genestreams tool if I could get it made. this is what it does. This is the one I did out of Uluru.
Yeah.
So this is your ancestral forms to myself, obviously, through time here as we move back through time. Here's the geological cross-sections of Uluru telling the story. Each one of these is compressing space and time by hundreds of millions of years. Here is the individual. So this individual's three-dimensional representation is that. This individual's three-dimensional representation is that. So on. This individual's three-dimensional representation is that. And going back. This is back at the Cretaceous. And so we move back. Here's your Devonian times. Here's your Cambrian times. And it correlates with the geological cross-section telling the story of Uluru at the time and the supercontinent.
That's a lovely story.
And the future as well.
Well, you see, that's the important. That's the part that we could add now. Is say the future of Uluru. This comes back to what I call the difference between the problem and preferred future.
Yep.
The problem is what will happen if we just let it happen. What will be, and then the preferred future, what should or could be. The different question. You as a white guy have mapped their story. Now, I'm assuming that they're pretty happy with that. I would presume would tell you if they hadn't been.
Pretty thrilled.
Yeah.
Pretty happy. I wasn't sure.
Well, that's good too.
Right,
in other words, you're actually sensitive and aware enough to know that they will hire you as their advocate. That's a level of trust which should be highly rewarded. It's not something that happens naturally, but you've actually done it. To say, I've told your story in a way that the immigrant Australia can understand, and understand what immigrant Australia have been talking about, and we trust you as the go-between between Indigenous Australia and immigrant Australia. You are now a go-between because you've created a toolkit to enable a conversation to take place. Yeah?
Whenever anyone that visits a sculpture can access the site and access all of the stories by the traditional owners through this page. This is the means by which they can tell a story by accessing the sculpture. Anybody that's there just accesses all that material. So I wanted to make it very effective in terms of broadening an awareness, not just of the songlines, but working in conjunction with best efforts from community groups that are trying to conserve the environment.
Well, I don't know why you're motivated to do that, but I think you've done something which is probably bigger than even you imagined. That's for you to decide. I'm not telling you that it's true, but what made you to tell that story? You had a reason you did that. But what I'm suggesting is when I look at it, I can see even grander things for what you've created. New markets for the ideas and concepts, which are 21st century markets of people who need this anchor, both the gene stream and all this stuff, which is a story of our land and our planet. And in the last bit, not natural evolution, but human interfered evolution. And now we've got to the stage where we're so interfering, now we have to interfere more to put the whole Humpty Dumpty back together again, if you like. Okay? Because that's the challenge. And you can give an information base to do that. And around the concepts of carbon farming and concepts like biodiversity, there's a whole lot of tools which can be integrated to enable planetary restoration to take place. And the story basically is we can have the best of both worlds. We can have what nature could offer us and create a stable, climate-safe, biodiverse planet, a happy humanity on it, and so on. And we can also have a 21st century knowledge-based economy where we can be richer than we ever dreamed, than we ever could. One of the other things I've said in my book is, I'm quoting Buckminster Fuller here. He said, wealth consists of two things: the physical that we must conserve, and the metaphysical, i.e. knowledge, that can only grow. And knowledge is a 21st century economy. So people used to talk about limits to growth. You know, we can't grow because there's not enough wealth on the planet, there's not enough resources on the planet. have they noticed that we're actually using resources a lot better? We're finding new ways to use the sun, so we know how to dig up coal. We're actually pretty adaptive people. Some people say we should do it better and faster. Yes, but we are doing it. We're not recalcitrant Donald Trump, who says, I'm not going to bloody change a thing. I want fossil fuels forever, or whatever it's going to be, or its equivalent. And so we have to change, and we change. Now, the people, and one of my other phrases is, the future success goes to those who get to the future first. Okay? Now, Elon Musk got to the future first with electric cars. Okay? And he's now got the biggest company on the world, even though he doesn't make all that many cars. Because people can see the potential, they're investing in the potential of the idea. Okay? Okay? And he's even smarter than that. He said, well, we're not going to make it in America. I'm going to use it to collaborate with the world. So you get the Chinese to make the cars. So we say, China is now part of our story. Donald Trump might hate China, but I'm not like that, because I know I need China and they need me. Thank you. Good for the world. Good for a global village. These people he's behaving like a global villager. Trusting a person. We used to trust, only people we used to trust we lived in our village. We didn't trust people out in other villages even, because they might have been the enemy. Now we have a global village, and we have to learn to collaborate and trust across that day. Well, that's another toolkit which I've got in my book. But the important point about it is, it's about collaborating. I'm the best at designing and measuring the cars. They're the best at making them, and we need each other. You're at a stage that you need other people to take this to the next step, and I made some suggestions about who these people might be, and you have to be a bold initiator now of saying, who are going to be the people I'm going to form core relationships with? So you've got the bandwagon, say, would you like to jump aboard? Oh, yes, please. That's what you're doing.
We had a meeting with the director of the National Museum, and he was referring to, he said it's like a node network across Australia, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
well, that's a good place to start with the director of the National Museum.
Yeah.
The first director was a good friend of mine, Don McMichael.
Right.
One of my closest friends.
Right.
Right. We set it up together.
Really?
The Whitlam government set the National Museum up. I can tell you how timely what you're doing is. It's like, the concept of just in time. I have a modified one of that called GPAT, J-E-P-A-T, which means just enough in place and time. In other words, nature says too much is bad. We put too much fertilizer in the soil that runs into the barrier reef. Not enough the plants don't grow. What we need is the Goldilocks amount, just enough. Okay? And it has to be in the right place at the right time. That's what nature is. So I've created that principle, which is one of 4 principles I call the ecological prosperity quintet. And all my life I slept with a piece of paper by my bed. Always. And I scribble something, go back to sleep, and then I try to work out what I've written in the morning. But, so it's your brain. And I ask people, where were you when your best ideas about your work occurred? And I'll bet you bottom dollar you weren't working.
Yes.
You're in the shower, walking the dog, lying on the beach, whatever it is. But when you're working, your right brain switches off, and your left brain is so task-oriented, says, I've got to get these things done. You don't think of it, and the brain, and then so actually I say you can actually work hard, you can work smart, but you can't do it both at the same time. And so you need reflective time so you can work smart. Your best ideas occur when you're in reflective mode and you are not working. And in the 21st century, better ways to do things is called innovation. It's central to everything. We don't actually, trying harder doesn't get you there anymore. Okay? And coming back here, let's talk about terra preta for a moment. You know about terra preta?
No.
Okay, this is an important story. The native people of the Amazon grow food in the middle of rainforest. Now, you know anything about rainforests lose all their, once you clear it, lose all their carbon, all their fertility, and becomes a wasteland in 10 years. Okay. These people live for millennia there. So they artificially created carbon-rich soil. Terra preta is Portuguese for meaning black earth. It's Portuguese for black earth. Now, if you put the word terra preta into the whole thing, this is part of what they did, and they cleared the land. They actually put charcoal from their campfires in the soil, and a whole lot of other tricks. And those soils are so rich they are jet black. The soils which are not very terra preta are almost white down, a bit of green organic on the top. The other thing about soils of the tropics is this, that they have no what's called exchange capacity. That means they don't have the clay minerals in them that can't hold the nutrients of the soil. They get leached out by the rain. But if there's organic matter there, it stays there forever. So these soils are not only black, but they're unbelievably productive and fertile forever. And these soils, they're so precious now that this bastard Bolsonaro is not only levelling the Amazon and taking away the biggest carbon sink on the planet, he's digging up the terra preta soils and selling that to by Brazilian farmers. Okay. And then he's putting cows on it, belching methane. If you want the worst act of climate damage you could imagine, that's it.
Yeah.
I'm saying the terra preta story because this is your story too. This is the story of Australian Indigenous people too. So they always burnt the land like the terra preta people did. They cleared land but only small bits. And they farmed it for agriculture, but they farmed it while adding to the soil carbon, and then they let it return to carbon and they cleared it somewhere else. Okay? Now, it's the same pattern here. You burn small patches. We had this bond, which we're both mesmerised by Gondwana and by the biology of that area. It's not my mainstream business, it never really has been, but it's something I personally love doing. Way back when I was at Cornell University, when I did a PhD there, and I did a PhD minor in botany. My PhD major was in the biochemistry of photosynthesis. That's how plants make fixed carbon. But and the professor was so excited that he got all these North American fellow students as him to consider the Gondwana. I could talk about it even then, even though I was only 22, or something like that. Talk about, and he wanted me to give lots of talks about the Australian flora and try to give the teaching I was learning in the botany department, where there were 2 Nobel laureates amongst my teachers, was that I could bring out this kind of global botanical view, because I learned about all the Laurasian stuff from him, but the Gondwana stuff didn't get a look in, And at that stage, I became a sort of a diplomat for Gondwana towards Laurasia, if you like, so.
Is there anything else, Ben?
Well, we should stop for a while.
No, it's not. What is it? It's almost 4 o'clock. 3:58.
It's almost 4.
What? It's gone to 4 o'clock already, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 3:58.
My goodness me, we've been for 4 hours. Sure.
That
Yeah,
just flew by.
3:58. It's 3:58.
Extraordinary.
I thought
There
it
you are.
was about 2 o'clock.
Well, there you are.
Brilliant. It was very productive. It was very productive.
Yeah, I think it's been
really great.
I'm really glad I came.
Yeah, it was a great conversation.
It's great to meet you, Ben.
You too.